The apartment was always loud, crowded, and packed with people, but I had never felt more alone in my entire life. 6 of us lived inside those thin, shifting walls: me, my mom, my grandma, and my 3 sisters. Our normal apartment layout had 4 bedrooms, alongside the kitchen and the living room. But even with 4 bedrooms split among us, shadows always seemed to hang heavily in the corners, no matter how bright it was outside. The air inside felt thick and stagnant, as if the walls of each room were holding their breath, waiting for the next argument or the next wave of tension to break. In a space where tension ruled, privacy was still an impossible luxury. The setup of that permanent space didn't ease the crowding. Me and my oldest sister had to share 1 bedroom, while my 2 youngest sisters were packed together into another. With the remaining bedrooms utilized by my mom and grandma, every conversation bled through the hollow doors. Every sigh was recorded by someone else, and the constant, buzzing static of the television was a permanent background track to our lives. On paper, a home with 4 bedrooms and so many people should have been bursting with life, energy, shared secrets, and childhood laughter. But in reality, it didn't feel like a home at all. It felt like an anchor holding us down beneath the surface, trapping us all in a suffocating loop that never seemed to end. Every single morning followed the exact same frustrating, heartbreaking routine. I would wake up early, long before the rest of the complex was fully awake. The sun would barely be peeking through the dusty, bent plastic blinds of the bedroom window I shared with my oldest sister, casting long, barred shadows across the floor. Despite how many times my heart had been broken the day before, a small, stubborn spark of hope would hit me every single morning. It was a survival instinct, I think. "Today will be different," I would whisper quietly to myself in the dark, trying to conjure up enough internal courage to face whatever version of my mother was going to wake up. I would get out of bed as quietly as possible, trying not to creak the floorboards or disturb my sisters. I would pull on my clothes, brush my teeth, and pull my hair back into a tight, neat ponytail. Then I would slip my arms through the worn canvas straps of my school backpack. That backpack was my prized possession. Inside it were blank notebooks, sharpened pencils, and folders, things that represented an orderly world where hard work meant something. My sisters would slowly wake up from their respective rooms and do the same, driven by that exact same quiet, desperate wish to escape the apartment, even if just for a few hours. Once we were dressed, we would gather by the front door. We would stand there in a small, hopeful, anxious line, our eyes locked onto the heavy metal deadbolt. I wanted so badly to just go to school. I craved it. I wanted to sit at a desk that belonged only to me, listen to a teacher explain a math problem, learn something completely new about the world, and see my friends laughing in the hallways. More than anything, I just wanted to cross the threshold of that building, breathe fresh air that didn't feel heavy with anger, and just be a normal kid. But just as my fingers would drift toward the cold metal of the doorknob, the floorboards would creak behind us. Mom would appear. She would stand squarely in the narrow hallway, her arms crossed or her frame leaning heavily against the drywall, physically blocking our path to the outside world. She would look at our backpacks, then at our faces, and her expression would harden. Before we could even say good morning, the wall of excuses would go up. "I'm too sick to take you today," she would say, coughing weakly into her hand or rubbing her temples for dramatic effect, ensuring we knew that our desire to go to school was actively hurting her. On other days, her voice wouldn't be weak or dramatic at all. It would be sharp, dismissive, cold, and absolute. "I'm just too tired to get up and deal with the traffic," she would snap. Or, "I have to walk you all the way down to the apartment bus stop, and my legs hurt too much. I can't do it today. You'll just have to stay back." We would try to plead. I would tell her that the bus stop wasn't that far, or that we could walk down the stairs and find it ourselves. But the moment we tried to speak up, the excuses would turn into anger. She would glare directly at me, her voice dropping the fake exhaustion and turning razor sharp. She would call me rude, hurtful names, throwing insults meant to slice through my confidence and make me feel small. She would tell us we were being selfish, that we didn't care that she was tired, or that we didn't understand how hard she had it. No matter what the excuse of the day was, the final result was always a carbon copy of the day before. She would turn her back, walk away, and leave the front door firmly locked. The insults and the excuses would hang in the crowded air like a toxic fog, suffocating the small spark of hope I had started the morning with. Once the heavy click of the lock signaled the end of our morning, the reality of the apartment would settle back down over us. The temporary momentum of getting ready would vanish into thin air. My sisters, completely defeated and entirely used to the crushing routine, would slowly unzip their backpacks. They would let them drop carelessly to the carpet. Their shoulders slumped as they drifted back toward the living room to turn on the TV, or crawled back under their blankets to sleep away the day. My grandma would resume her quiet morning routine, moving around the kitchen or sitting in her chair, acting as if nothing wrong had just happened, as if keeping children home from school was completely normal. But for me, the day was far from over. In fact, my real shift was just beginning. I would stand by the door for a long minute, staring at the locked deadbolt, feeling a hot wave of frustration and grief rise in my throat. The echo of the rude name she had just called me would ring in my ears, making my chest ache. But I knew crying wouldn't change anything, and it certainly wouldn't stop the comments if the apartment wasn't clean. I would take a deep, shaky breath, unbuckle the chest straps of my own backpack, and set it carefully against the wall. It felt like dropping a physical weight, but a much heavier, invisible, and deeply unfair burden was immediately placed onto my young shoulders. My real job for the day wasn't reading, history, science, or social studies. My job was to act as the unpaid, unappreciated caretaker for a crowded household of 5 other people across the apartment. Having 4 bedrooms didn't make it easier. It just meant there was more square footage to clean, more floors to sweep, and more spaces where everyone else's messes gathered. I would start my day in the small kitchen, and that was where the true extent of the cruelty lived. Inside the kitchen, everyone had marked food. The lines were drawn clearly, and we weren't allowed to touch what wasn't ours. For us kids, my mom would only buy 5 TV dinners each, and those 5 meals were meant to stretch and last longer than an entire week. We had to carefully ration them, knowing that was all we were getting. Meanwhile, Mom would only look out for herself. Whenever she went out, she only bought food for her own consumption. She would return to the apartment and only stock up on her own personal supply, leaving us to look at the marked packages and count down our individual meals with empty stomachs, because she wouldn't provide for us and refused to get out of bed for days at a time. The neglect piled up. Doing the laundry was an impossible task too. To use the local laundromat, you had to be 18 or older, and since I wasn't old enough yet, my hands were completely tied. There were terrible stretches of time, sometimes a whole week, where my mom simply stayed in bed because she wouldn't move or help us. My sisters and I were forced to go a week at a time without clean clothes and without a shower. The basic dignity of feeling clean and fed was stripped away from us, all because the adults who were supposed to care for us chose to stay under the blankets. I would turn the kitchen water on as hot as my hands could stand, pouring in dish soap until the bubbles filled the sink. I would scrub each plate, each fork, and each pan, my skin growing red and raw from the heat and the chemicals. The counters never seemed to stay clean. The moment I wiped away a sticky spill or cleared off the crumbs, someone would walk back in, make a mess, and walk out without a second thought. I would wipe down the stovetop, scrub the inside of the microwave, and organize the chaotic pantry, trying to force order onto a space that constantly resisted it. Once the kitchen was done, I would move to the living room. Because there were 6 of us living there, the living room accumulated clutter at an alarming speed. Shoes were left in the middle of the floor, blankets were strewn across the couch, wrappers were left on the coffee table, and clothes were piled up in corners. I would go around picking up after my sisters, picking up after my mom, and sorting the endless mountains of laundry into darks and lights. I would drag the heavy, loud vacuum cleaner across the worn carpet, pushing it back and forth until my arms ached. I would get down on my hands and knees to sweep the dust and dirt out from under the furniture, ensuring that no one could find a single thing to complain about. I washed the windows, wiped down the baseboards, and took out the heavy trash bags, dragging them down the concrete walkways myself. Then I would move toward the bedrooms. I had to ensure the common areas and the adults' rooms were kept up, but I didn't clean my youngest sister's bedroom. Instead, I would step into the bedroom I shared with my oldest sister. This room was a different kind of heartbreak. I desperately wanted just one corner of the world to be clean, neat, and orderly. a tiny sanctuary where I could feel a sense of control over my life. I would spend so much time sweeping, folding, and carefully organizing my half of the space. But it never lasted. My oldest sister would come right back in and leave her clothes everywhere, dropping trash and scattering messes across the floor, completely ruining the neatness I worked so hard to maintain. It felt like no matter how hard I fought to create a little bit of peace, someone was always there to tear it down. The hardest part of those long, repetitive days wasn't the physical exhaustion. Though my back often ached by noon, it wasn't the soap-stung skin on my hands or the tiredness in my eyes. The hardest part was the crushing, devastating feeling of being completely invisible. I was spending all of my life force, all of my energy, and all of my time keeping that large apartment spotless for everyone else. I was ensuring my mother's comfort, picking up after my family, and keeping the peace, while my own future, my education, and my basic human right to just be a child were completely ignored. I was trapped inside those walls, carrying a heavy, complicated adult burden that never should have belonged to a child. I was a maid in my own home, kept away from the world so that I could keep the apartment running. It was a lonely, quiet kind of pain, watching the sun move across the living room wall day after day, knowing that another school day had passed me by, and knowing that I was falling further and further behind. Days slowly bled into long weeks, and weeks turned into a miserable blur of heavy chores, missed mornings, and stolen potential. I finally turned 18 years old, a milestone that should have meant freedom, but everything was currently in flux. Because our original 4-bedroom home was undergoing major renovations, the 6 of us had pack up and temporarily move into a completely different layout, a 3-bedroom apartment within the complex. The compression of losing a bedroom only amplified the explosive energy inside the house. In this temporary space, the room assignments shifted, and I found myself sharing a bedroom with my younger sister instead of my oldest. The walls felt unfamiliar, and the layout was different, but the toxic pattern remained exactly the same. Barely a month after my 18th birthday, the ultimate breaking point arrived. It didn't happen on a quiet morning. It happened on a terrifying night when the built-up tension inside those 3 bedrooms finally exploded. My mother's anger turned toward my 2 youngest sisters, and everything inside me snapped. The exhaustion and compliance disappeared, replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. I stepped directly between my mother and my little sisters, shielding them with my own body right there in the temporary apartment. "If you don't stop, I'm calling the cops on you," I threatened, holding my ground even as my heart hammered violently against my ribs. Desperate to de-escalate the situation and find help, I grabbed the phone and called my grandma instead. But there was no comfort on the other end of the line. Instead of helping, Grandma sighed, her voice cold and resentful. She told me she was tired of us causing problems. Then she delivered a crushing threat. She threatened to take everything away from us: our home, our clothes, and even our food. Shocked and heartbroken by her cruelty, I hung up on her. Within minutes, the phone in the apartment rang. It was Grandma calling back. My oldest sister answered it, but she didn't keep the conversation to herself or turn against me. Instead, she pressed the button to put the phone call completely on speakers. I could hear what was happening. Over the speaker, Grandma's voice cut through the room, using her authority from a distance to enforce her cruel decision. Bound by the weight of Grandma's absolute orders blasting through the speaker, the decision was made that I was being kicked out of the temporary apartment. But I didn't just walk out empty-handed right away. Instead of running immediately into the dark breezeway, I went back into the bedroom I was sharing with my younger sister. With my hands shaking and my chest tight with a mix of fear and sheer determination, I began packing my bags. I gathered my clothes, my personal things, and my school backpack, the few pieces of my life that actually belonged to me. Once my bags were packed, I sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone to call the only true family I had left, my aunt and uncle. The tears finally spilled over, heavy and hot, catching in my throat as I dialed. I was crying so hard it was difficult to speak when they answered. "Please come and get me," I choked out into the receiver, my voice trembling over the line. "We're on our way," they answered without a single second of hesitation. The weight inside those unfamiliar walls felt like an eternity. Every creak of the floorboards or shadow in the hallway made me brace for another argument. but I stayed put next to my packed bags until I knew they were close. When the text came that they had arrived, I picked up my belongings, walked down the concrete stairs of the complex, and stepped straight out into the cool night air of the open parking lot. And there, parked right near the entrance, was their car. Waiting by the side of the vehicle were my aunt and uncle. The moment my eyes found them, the frantic pounding in my chest began to slow down. There was absolutely no tension radiating from them. There were no heavy, dramatic sighs, no complaints of being too tired, no medical excuses, and no anger. They weren't looking at me as a worker to be utilized or a burden to be managed. They were just standing there, solid, unwavering, and completely ready to catch me. The contrast between the parking lot and the apartment I just escaped was instantaneous and overwhelming. My aunt took 2 quick steps forward, meeting me halfway. She didn't ask me why I was crying, she didn't lecture me, and she didn't ask me to explain anything. She just reached out, wrapped her arms tightly around my shaking shoulders, and pulled me into a gentle, deeply reassuring hug. It was the kind of hug that felt like a shield, placing itself between me and everything I had ever gone through. As she held me, the chaotic weight that had lived in the center of my chest for years, the anxiety, the invisibility, the exhaustion, began to melt off my shoulders. She gently took the heavy bags from my hands, placing them safely, respectfully, into the trunk of the car, treating my belongings and my education like something valuable. "You're safe now," my uncle said quietly, his steady voice cutting through the trauma of the night. He opened the passenger door, waiting until I was safely inside the warm sanctuary of the car. "We've got you. Let's go home." I climbed into the passenger seat and clicked my seatbelt into place, the sound final and concrete. I locked my eyes onto the side mirror. As my uncle started the engine and the car accelerated away from the apartment complex parking lot, I watched the temporary apartment, the concrete walkways, and the stairs grow smaller and smaller in the glass. We turned the corner onto the main road, and the building vanished from view completely. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closed my eyes, and let my hands rest loosely in my lap. For the very first time in my life, I took a deep, full, unburdened breath of absolute freedom. The car pulled away into the dark, leaving that temporary apartment behind forever. But the true ending of that night wasn't just the building fading in the rearview mirror. It was the beginning of the life I always deserved to have. It has been almost 3 years since that night. 3 years since I swapped a life of isolation, verbal abuse, neglect, and heavy adult burdens for a home built entirely on safety, encouragement, and unconditional love. The moment we walked through their front door, my aunt and uncle stopped being just relatives. They truly became my mom and dad. They kept the promise they made to me in the car. There were no more excuses, no more locked doors keeping me from my dreams, and no more cruel words tearing me down. When the world felt overwhelming and the trauma of the past tried to creep back in, they stood by me, helping me heal step by step. They sat with me through the late nights of studying, cheered the loudest for me, and helped me finish high school, a milestone that once felt completely impossible when I was trapped inside those walls. Today, as I stand on the edge of starting my second year of college, I look at the backpack I carry. It isn't a symbol of a missed world anymore. It is packed with my own choices, my own future, and my own success. I survived this storm, protected my sisters, and found my way to the parents who truly loved me. With mom and dad by my side, I am finally free to build the life I always wanted.